Can you tell me where your family is originally from, their ancestral towns in Armenia?
Okay, they're born in Turkey,
Hmm.
and my father was born in a town called, or near a town. He was in a small village up in the hills, but the nearest big town was called Chimishgezek, Cemesgezek or something. And I'd always tell him, you know, were you born in town? He goes, no. And I said, well, why don't you tell me where you were born? He says, because when you go someplace, like let's say you go to New York, and someone asks you where were you from? So you might be living in Easton, but nobody knows where in the hell Easton is. You're going to say Fresno. Same thing with me. You see, so that's how I tell you Chibishkazek.
Hmm.
And my mother was born in uh, a village or a suburb of a town called Harpert,
Hmm.
and the village's name was Mesre, Mesre or something.
Wow. And do you know what years they were born?
My mother was born in 1898, and my father was born about 1892.
Mm. What can you tell me about what their lives were like in Armenia?
You know, their early lives, they like in the old country and stuff, I really don't know anything about, except my dad lived in a small village, and he said there was 16 huts in the village.
Wow.
And apparently in the wintertime, it got so cold that they raised animals, oxen, sheep, goats, stuff like that, cows. And he says in the winter it got so cold that some of the weaker and smaller animals, they put them on the first floor, and the family lived in the second floor of the hut. And it wasn't much of it. It was a mud hut or something. It wasn't very much.
Mm.
The most impressive thing I remember is I went and saw in 1973, I went to Armenia, and I saw my uncle, my father's brother.
Wow.
And the question I asked him was on that day, I don't know if it's April 24th or whatever, the day you knew the Turks were going to massacre you. Do you remember anything about that day? He says, all I remember is in the morning, he says, a bunch of Turkish soldiers came into our village and told us that all males 16 years and older were to go to another village close by that had a bigger church. And we're supposed to go to that church. And so he says, my dad was the only one amongst us that was a male or over 16 years old. But your dad said we're already in America. And he says, and my other brothers were younger than me. So he says, my dad went to the church, and he says they took him down into a basement. And he says, now when I say basement, it didn't have four walls like this. It was carved out of rock. So the walls weren't even. It was carved. They'd carved them and stuff. There was indentations in it and stuff. There's no electricity, so there was no lights. So they had a few torches down there for light. And he says when we got in there, the Turkish soldiers came down, and he says they tied them by rope, 2 by 2. And after they tied everybody, they said, "Okay, we're going to go somewhere else." And he says, as we went out, so the guy next to my father shoved him into one of those crevices. And I guess the troops didn't notice it. And the people behind him didn't squeal or say anything. Hey, these guys went. He says, they all marched out. Everybody left the church. And so we were scared to go up and even look. So finally he says, my dad got enough nerve, and him and the fella, they went and they looked, and all the Turkish soldiers, everybody had gone.
Wow.
So next thing I know is he came running home and told my mom and the rest of us, grab whatever you can carry real fast, because they could come any minute now and get us. So we grabbed it and we ran up in the hills. And he says, my father said that, he says, we got to go toward Russia. So we knew we had to head east. And he says, we went at night, traveled by night, and we slept during the daytime and hid. And he says after a few days he ran out of food, and then he started eating grass and roots of trees and whatever, anything we could find. And and he says the next thing I knew, they settled in Georgia, the country of Georgia. And he says your father sent us in 1922. He says he sent us $200. It was like today if we'd received $200 million.
Whoa.
He says we'd never seen anything like that. We got $200 through the American Red Cross in Tiflis, Georgia. And then he says your father sent us another $400 a couple of years later. And he says then we lost all contact because Stalin took over Russia. And he says until Khrushchev became president, my father, through the Red Cross, looked for his family, and he found them again.
Wow.
So anyway, that's all I can tell you about his family.
When did your father meet your mother?
My father came to America, married his first wife.
Okay.
She got she got hit by an automobile, and the son that was in her arms, and that was in 1917, I think. My mother was married to another gentleman back east, and her husband died, and her in-laws brought her to California because they had a relative in Fresno. And that's when apparently some matchmakers or something made them up. They said that guy lost his wife, you lost her husband. So they put them together, and that was in about 1918.
Do you know any other stories about your father's journey immigrating to the United States?
You know, I looked for him I went through all the Ellis Island boarding the ship, and I found out the name of my father's ship, and I looked. Then the registry in Ellis Island. I couldn't find a Parnagian, but I knew he came on that ship. So years later, I mean 40, 50 years later, I think after my father had passed away, I was talking to a family by the name of a young man by the name of Topchin. And the Topchins were from Chimishkazeg. My father and my uncle went to Bulgaria to the Topchin family there. They'd left Armenia before Turkey before my folks did. My father did, and he found them work so they could get enough money to pay passage to the United States, and then when my father made enough money to get the passage, he wouldn't send my father and my uncle together in case I don't know why, in case the ship sank or something. The two brothers went. So he shipped my father and his oldest son came to America, which was in 1911. They first came to America, and then this young Topchin boy. One day I told him, you know what, I can't find my name on the Ellis Island, my father's name on the Ellis Island registry. He says, you know why? I heard my dad and my uncles and stuff talking about your dad, and they said that on the ship going over, they left Le Havre, France. They left France.
Wow.
How they got from Bulgaria to France, I have no idea.
Wow.
And he says, on the ship, there was talk amongst these Armenian guys down on the bottom of the ship that, you know, IAN or Yan means son of. And he says, so that's the name you're supposed to use. So he says, when your dad came, they asked him what his name was at Ellis Island. His father's name was Sarkis. He says, my name is Bedros Sarkisian. Because I'm using the Sarkis IAN. And that's why you won't find my name. Boy, I went and looked right away on that ship, I think. There he is, Bedros Sarkisian.
Wow.
So that was another story.
Wow. That's amazing. When did you figure that out?
Maybe 10 years ago.
Okay, that's great. Can you tell me more about what your mom and dad's early life in California was like?
God, I couldn't tell. farming was good when they first got married, or it was getting good.
Mm.
And then right after they got married, and they got married in 1918, I think.
Okay.
And 1919, 1920, 1921 were good years. About 22 and 23, the price of raisins started going down. So I was born in 1932.
Mm.
Raisins were $32 a ton.
Mm.
So they built a new home in Fresno. They were good. He bought a new Hudson car. He was rolling in money, and then the whole world crashed on him because price of raisins weren't worth anything,
Mm-hmm.
and he lost everything.
Wow.
And so it was a tough life, and they struggled. Yeah, until they separated in 1940.
Okay.
They struggled.
Can you tell me more about your childhood growing up?
I had a nice upbringing. I started in Fowler Grammar School. I went the first and second grades there. And I think the third grade, my mom took me with her she used to work in canneries in Northern California to augment my dad's income. And so she went to Suisun Fairfield. It's actually on the San Francisco Bay.
Yeah.
And she worked at a Del Monte cannery there. And I don't know if I should bring this up, but just to show you how people were different then than now. I remember school finished for me. All right. So she was going to send me home to my dad. And so she put me on the train there like at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I start coming. And then she says at a place called, I can't remember the name of the town. She says, you have to change trains. So I changed the trains. And then I got on the train that came to Fresno. And I came to Fresno, and I remember I got here around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was expecting my brother John to pick me up at the train depot. He wasn't there. I went looking all over and everything. So the station master, you won't find this today, he noticed me just sitting there. Every once in a while, I'd go outside and look around. Couldn't find him. Come back and sit down. And until around maybe 2, 3 o'clock, and a couple hours after I got here, he noticed it. And he goes, young man, he says, who are you waiting for? And I said, I'm waiting for my brother John. And she goes, do you know where he lives? Yeah, I says, he lives on 806 Roosevelt Street. She goes, you know his phone number? I said, yeah, it's 33563. And she goes, okay. And he goes back. About 15, 20 minutes later, he says, I kept calling the number, nobody answers. He says, then I got a hold of the post office department. He says, I actually talked to his postman that delivers mail to his home. He says, and the man says, mail hasn't been picked up for 3 days.
Wow.
So he says, but don't worry, I've made the arrangements. In those days, the police station used to be down on Broadway, next to the Carnegie Library, which was also on Broadway. He goes, I made arrangements. I called the police department already, and they said they got a nice cell close to their office so they can watch you at night. And he says they're going to put you up for the evening, and they'll feed you and everything, so you don't have a thing to worry. Whenever your brother shows up, he shows up. We'll tell him where you're at, and he'll come and pick you up. So, God, okay, so I'm going to go to the police station tonight. But all of a sudden, about an hour later, my brother John shows up. And he'd gone to the ranch, picked up my dad, taken his wife and daughter, and they'd gone to Yosemite.
Oh.
And in Yosemite, she happened to get a tick in her shoulder. And they tried to take it out up there, but they told them, you better go back to Fresno and go to a hospital and let them take it out. We're not experts at it. So they came back a day or two early, or else I would have been in jail for a couple of days. And then he apparently, the mailman or somebody put a notice that he saw the card. My mother had sent a card that I was going to be here at a certain time on a Saturday to pick me up there. And she saw the card and he came and got me.
Oh my goodness.
That was another
It's
experience.
a great story.
Yeah.
Do you know how old you were when that
I
happened?
was, what? Let me see. I was about 7 years old. My mother, when she bought the ranch in Biola, now she got a few bucks. So every year she'd take me to Sequoia National Park for a 2-week vacation. It'd be right at the end of August, before September the 1st. September the 1st, she picked the raisins, the grapes for the raisins. So we had to be home. But for 2 weeks, I got a map of all the trails in Sequoia National Park. And I walked every single one that I could leave the house at cabin at 8 in the morning, and I could get back before dark. And so I went all through the park, everything. Nobody ever hurt you or nothing. Nowadays, I wouldn't let my 7 or 8-year-old, 10-year-old kid go anywhere without me being near them.
Yeah. Wow.
America was different then.
Different time.
Yep.
Can you tell me more about what religion and going to church was like when you grew up?
Well, the main thing I talked about earlier was especially when I went with my father to church. He always sang with the choir, and it embarrassed me because he'd be the only one in the audience singing. And it was just something from his youth that he did. And another thing, there was a guy there by the name of Jack Gavigian. And all I know is I'd see Jack come to church till Jack passed away. If I went to church, the minute he stood up, I stood up. The minute he sat down, I sat down. He's the only one I trusted in the church because they said there's a light up there. When that light goes on, and sometimes the light didn't go on, and so I never knew when to stand and when to sit. But Jack knew exactly.
Wow, that's great.
And there was some prejudices about Armenians, like they'd call you a black Armenian or something like that or something. But
Professional Indian.
yeah, things like that never bothered me. So it was good, and I never had. For some reason, I was never prejudiced. I'll remember when I went to Fowler Grammar School, first grade. I go, there's a black kid. Well, I don't even know if I'd seen a black kid before. All I know is he ran up to me, goes, "Hey," he goes, "we want to play ball with me?" And I go, "Sure." He goes, "My name's Thomas," and he was my best friend in the first grade.
Aww.
So I never developed the prejudice, and maybe even like in years later, 20 years later, I got my first new car. It was a 1936 Chevy, and I was driving I was way out on Whitesbridge somewhere. I wasn't paying attention. It's my first day with the car or something, and I ran out of gas. And so I got out of the car and I started walking toward Fresno. I'm about 8-10 miles out of town. All of a sudden, the car stops. There's a black gentleman and his wife with 2 young children in the back seat. He says, "You having trouble?" I said, "Yeah, I ran out of gas." He says, "Well, jump in." He says, "I'll give you a ride to the service station." Well, I said, the nearest station I know of is Louis Geneso's Texaco station in Chinatown. That's 8 or 10 miles. He goes, "I'll take you there."
Oh.
So the guy took me there. I got my gallon of gas, and got my thing, and I'm gonna hitchhike back. The guy comes pulling up to me again. He's been sitting out there waiting for me.
Wow.
He says, "Hop in." And I says, "What?" He says, "I'm gonna take you back to your car." I says, "Well, that's 8 or 10 miles. You're probably not even gonna go that way." He goes, "Never mind." He says, "I picked you up there. I'm gonna take you back there." And he took it back. So I've never really had an prejudice toward a black person, because unless they're real bad, I might have it. But even in the Navy, they use the N-word. The guys from the South would use the N-word about the black kids in the boot camp with us, and that just bothered the heck out of me. Years later at Fowler Packing Company, I had a gentleman came up and wanted a job, and he says, his name is Charles Hodge, and he says, I said, "Well, I need a loader for loading trucks and stuff." He says, I'm your man. And in talking to him in the days after that, I found out he was going to Fresno State. He was studying to be a lab technician.
Wow.
So, but we did quite a bit of business in the South. We'd get these Southern truck drivers, and they'd come in and they'd say, hey, tell that nigga that I want my truck loaded this way. I go, oh, excuse me. Charles, get your stripper and everything. We're getting out of this truck. And we'd get out of the truck, and the guy said, well, what happened? I said, I don't like your language and of addressing my worker. I said, you either apologize to me or get out of here. And usually if you go to Charles, and they'd apologize.
Mm.
And
Wow.
so I really had a prejudice for people. So
when did you start working on the farm?
when I started working on the farm, it was really when my mother bought the farm in Biola. I started working a little bit, but I was 1940. I was 8 years old.
Wow.
So I couldn't do much really, and she didn't have a tractor or nothing like that. We had a good neighbor next to us. His name was Mr. Steffen, and he farmed in Kerman, which was 10 miles away. But he had a 20-acre ranch next to ours. So she'd give me a nickel. She'd say, when you go on your way to school, stop at Dunn's service station, call Mr. Steffen. Here's his phone number. Tell him we need our ranch furrowed. We're going to get irrigation water. And I'd go and I'd call Mr. Steffen, and he said, okay, next Tuesday I'm going to do my ranch. I'll do your ranch at the same time. And that's how she farmed the ranch all the time we had it she bought it in 1940 and sold it in 1946.
Wow.
Mr. Steffen did all our tractor work.
Wow, that's amazing. Did all of your siblings work on the farm as well?
My one brother, Varkas or Art, he went in the Army right about the war had started, because she bought it in 40 to 41, the war started. And he wasn't around till when the war ended. And then when he came back, my mother says, well, stay here and work on the ranch, and if we make a little more money and stuff, maybe we'll buy another ranch, and we'll get it a little bigger. He grew on the ranch during the Depression. He goes, nope, I'm going to go to town and look for a job. So that was it. So just me and my mom stayed on the ranch.
Wow.
So all the years.
Wow. And can you tell me how you got started with your own fruit packing company?
Well, when I graduated from Fresno State, but also growing up as once I got to high school, my oldest brother John had a service station, body shop, paint shop, garage, everything, complete car service center. So I went to work for him. Well, okay, at the time, prevailing wages were 75 cents an hour. He paid me $1 an hour because he knew I was buying the groceries for my mom, paying the phone bill, PG&E bill, and everything else. I was doing all that. And the only time I'd go to my brothers for help would be when the taxes came. Taxes on the house were like $400 or something. I can't remember how much. And it was more than I had. So I'd go to my brothers and say, is there any way you guys can help me? And they'd always help. They'd give mom the money to thing. And then I really didn't have money to buy my mom. My mom ran out of money. She sold the ranch for $25,000, and then just in a few years, she lost all her money. Was gone. My brother Art Varkas, he got married. She bought him a lot. Then she paid. I think he did arrange for building the house, but he didn't have the money for the furniture. I don't know. My mother bought most of the furniture. Did this, did that, and everything. And in a few years, her money was gone. So that was it. But anyway, my brother John always sang. Then when I went to Fresno State, he raised my wages from $1 to $2 an hour. And every Saturday night when he paid me, he'd say, is there any school projects or anything you need money for? Maybe there's going to take field trips or something. You might need money for bus fare or getting a motel or something. Anything. Never for money for myself to spend on going to the movies or anything. But if it was anything to do with education, he'd always ask every Saturday night. It was like clockwork. Say, you need any extra money for school, anything in school?
Wow.
And so he helped me a lot.
Mm.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about your time at Fresno State?
You know what? The main reason I went to Fresno State because everybody told me, get a good job, you got to have a college education. So all I cared about was getting a college education. I wasn't a good student because I didn't study hard enough because I worked at the service station most of the time and stuff. I didn't get home till late at night. My mom would have my dinner for me. I'd eat dinner, maybe take a bath or something, and go to bed. I didn't study that hard, and as I was probably a C plus student. I worked. You just all I did is I had to go to work at the service station there in the winter, and my dad's ranch in the summertime.
Wow. And can you share more about the rest of your career in farming?
Well, I really didn't buy. I didn't buy a ranch until I got married, and I got married in 1960. And in 1962, I was working for the Pillibus brothers. They were West Side farmers, and they owned shopping centers in town. And my dad came to their office, and he goes, "Hey, right down the street from me, about a mile down the street from me, I just drove this morning. I saw a for sale ranch sign on 20 acres of empty ground." And he goes, you better check into it. So I said, okay. So I went down that night. I went and I saw the sign with the phone number. So I called the guy up, and he goes, "Yeah, I want $20,000, $1,000 an acre for 20 acres." It had an old broken down house that I know my wife. It's not a house for her. She would live in, and so I said, okay. So I finally bought the ranch from him with a very small down payment. I think a $4,000 down payment he wanted, and so it's an empty piece of ground, but it had a big hole in one corner, maybe 4 or 5 feet lower than the rest of the ranch. So I was married then. So my father-in-law was a farmer, and he had all kinds of equipment. So he goes, I at an auction, I bought an old Miller scraper, and I got these SO case tractors, these old SO case tractors. He says, come and take a couple of tractors and that Miller scraper. And he says, you think. So every night at 5 o'clock, I leave work. I take my work clothes with me to work, change my clothes in the bathroom, and go to the ranch, and I'd drive tractor till maybe midnight, 1 o'clock, until I leveled that. I covered that hole up, and I leveled. So I finally told my father-in-law, I says, how do I know if it's level? He says, we'll make a furrow from one end to the other end where that low spot was, and if the water goes all the way level, you did a good job. And I did that, and sure enough, it was level. So my dad says he had 12 acres on his ranch. He had 12 acres of Kerrigan grapes. So he made cuttings that you put in the ground. You make, and we figured out I needed 11,000 vines to plant that vineyard. So he made the cuttings. He buried them and everything. And if you bury them in a few months, little roots will come out on one end. So anyway, he got me to plant. Didn't cost me nothing. He did all the work himself, and I planted the vineyard. That was planted in 1962, and in 1965, I got my first crop. And I remember I think I got about $12,000 or so for the crop.
Wow.
So I went to the Fowler Bank and I says, I want to build a house, and I needed a house. And I need a house, and I think it's going to cost me around $25,000. So he goes, okay. He says, and the guy's name was Don Fitzpatrick, the bank manager, and he was a pretty good guy. So anyway, he goes, okay. He says, I'll lend you the money. he says, go bring your plans for the house and everything so we can approve them and all. And we'll go, okay. So I found the builder. His name was Larry Archer.
Mm.
And he says, the house was 2,200 and some square feet. He says, I'll build it for $25,000, which is $12.27 a square foot. If you could build a house for $500 more than that today, you can't do it.
Wow.
Anyway, Mr. Archer built up because when I married my wife, and I had a daughter born in 1962. I wanted, in the worst way, I wanted my wife to have a nice home.
Mm.
And so I was determined. I don't care what I had to do. I wanted a new home for her. And nothing was for me. It was for mainly her and my little girl. And so I got my crop money, went and then I went back to the bank. Oh, just before I was going to start, Mr. Fitzpatrick, the bank moved him or did something to him. He wasn't around no more. So I went back and I said, I brought my plans in to be approved. He told me to bring them. The bank wanted to approve him. And there was another guy there, I'm trying to think of his name and it escapes me right now. He says, well, you don't have to bring him because I don't think we want to lend you. He was the former vice president. He says, and I don't think we're going to lend you any money. So that was crushed. So I had a friend by the name of Ronald Cloud, and he goes, I know a banker, I'm going to set it up for you. Mm. And before I went to the banker, I think I left the plans at the Fowler Bank. So the other banker wanted the plans too. So I went to the Fowler Bank. I said, I want my plans back. And they'd brought in a new president. And the new guy tells me, he says, what do you want? What do you want back? And I said, my plans. I left them here for you guys to examine, but you said you weren't in the mood of lending me my money. So I came to I got another bank that interested in lending the money. He goes, don't move no plans till you talk to me. Come back in 48 hours. So I went back in 48 hours. He goes, your plans are approved.
Wow.
He says, so don't worry about going to another bank. We're going to give you the money. And there was some other things that I had to do, but he said, we're going to forget all that, doing that. So he was very nice. I'm trying to think of his name, Higagiri, I think it was. Anyway, and that's how I built my home in 1965 and built my wife a nice new home and everything. So that was great.
That's amazing. And the reason we're here today is because you wrote a book about your own family history and your own life stories. I was wondering if you could share what inspired you to do that.
My brother Art, the one that had been married 3 times, he had a daughter from second wife and one from the third wife. Mm-hmm. And the daughter from the third wife, I used to take her fruit all the time. She's a teacher at Central Union High School. Her name is Lori Parnagian. And I take her fruit all the time. And so one day she told me, she says, Uncle Pete, I don't know nothing about the Parnagian family. She says, I don't know where we came from, what happened, anything else. So I says, so that's what got me thinking about, maybe what if I wrote down something about our family? Well, it was years later that it came to me because now I'm older and I'm not involved in the business like I used to be in my younger days. And so I have more time to do things and stuff. So that's when I started thinking, maybe I'll write down something about the thing. And that's how I started the book.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Did you have any difficulty remembering or figuring out what to tell?
I had no thing. I said, I'm just going to sit down and just try to remember what I'm doing and where I was born. And that's how I start I start talking about Dr. Nielsen, the guy that delivered me, at the front of the first paragraph of the book. And I happened to check up on his background. He'd passed away for many years before, but I checked up on his background. He went to the University of Southern California, and he bought that little thing in Fowler, a little hospital room, office, really. And he divided the office in half. He put 6 or 8 beds on one side. Then there was a wall, and then his medical practice was on the other side. And it was next to the corner, and he built a house on the corner. So he was right there. And my mother tells the story of when I'm a little kid, she says, she called it double pneumonia. I don't know what double pneumonia is. She says, you got double pneumonia. So he says, we took you to a doctor in Fresno, and he gave some medicine and stuff, but he says, I'd advise you to go do the last rites for him.
Mm-hmm.
So my mother comes home, and she kept looking at me and everything. So about the middle of the night, she tells my dad, she goes, you know what? He's the youngest. He says, he's the baby. And he says, either you go get Dr. Nielsen and Fowler, or she says, I'm going to get a towel and put it around my throat, and I'm going to kill myself. And you have to raise the other 4 boys by yourself. So my dad got in his car. He luckily had a car, and he drove the Fowler, and he got Dr. Nielsen, and Dr. Nielsen followed him to the ranch. And the story goes, he goes, what we need is mustard plaster to put on his chest and everything. And she says, well, I don't know what that is, my mom goes. And he goes, you Armenians, he says, you Armenians call them madzun. He says, you got any madzun around? She goes, yeah. He says, well, put it in a big pan, whatever you got. And she says, boy, get it hot. So she says, he took you and he put you in a thing, and he says, he put this yogurt, madzun is yogurt. He says, he put this yogurt all around your chest area, down all your midsection. And she says, he told my mom, you got any blankets, old blankets or anything around here? She said, yeah. And she got them, and she wrapped them around that blanket. He says, okay, we'll know by morning if he's going to make it or not. And she says, in the morning, you're breathing better. And she says, so you survived.
Whoa.
It was the mother.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was an interesting story, I
fantastic.
thought.
I'm curious, could you talk more about what preserving Armenian culture means to you?
Well, I don't know. You know, my mother tried to put me in Armenian school at first. And I went to Armenian school. My first was in the front of the church, on the office on the left-hand side, or on the west side, is where my first class was. And I started learning the alphabet, I, Ben, Kim, so on. And then my mother would go to the cannery, and she'd take me with her. So I go to the cannery for 3 months or 4 months or whatever it was. I came back. Now the class is way ahead of me, and I'm lost. My Armenian school days weren't very good, because every time I was I got into it a little bit. I went with my mom or somewhere, and something happened, and so I didn't get that. But I knew the church had a basement where I used to go, and these people would the orators. I remember there's an orator by the name of Mr. Amaduni, and he'd get up there and he'd talk about the Armenian heritage and everything. And I understood pretty good Armenian, because I actually knew Armenian before I knew English, really. And so I was very impressed with him. And I don't know, somehow through that I know we hated the Turks because they killed us all, and so on. I'll never forget. I'm skipping around now. 1957, I went to work in Mexico, Culiacan, Sinaloa, Mexico, and we had a grower down there. It was a company that grew tomatoes, eggplants, bell peppers, cucumbers, stuff like that, all vegetables. And we had a grower. His name was Isaac Farhi. He was Turkish. He told me one day. He says, "I'm a Turk," and I said, "Oh." And then I didn't say nothing. About a week or 10 days later, he says, "You know what? I'd like to take you to dinner." I said, "Isaac, you know what? Your people, I hesitate to go to. You're okay, but I says I hesitate to go to dinner with you because of the history." And he goes, "What history?" I says, "Well, your people killed all my people." He goes, "We did?" I said, "Yeah. Did your parents tell you anything or anything like that?" "No, never heard of it." I said, "There was a massacre. You killed 1.5 million Armenians or something." And I said, "How can I go to dinner with you?" he goes, well, I have nothing against you. And he says, we're friends. And he says, so I said, okay. So I went to dinner with him. So that was it. But as far as the heritage and stuff goes, that was the only thing that I hesitated with the guy for a while. But then he told me he didn't know. He says, I'd never heard of that.
Wow. Can you tell me, have you observed any changes in the Fresno Armenian community over time?
You know what? Probably because I'm not involved in the community like my brothers were.
Mm.
I guess my brothers were. They had the Seragruns. Was it Armenian Club? Harry Avakian, all them guys,
Yeah.
Droff Garabedian, my brother John,
Yeah.
all of them were belonged to that club. But I never was involved in anything like that, so I did myself know. It was before me that there was a group that was formed, and they're all Armenians.
Mm.
So I didn't get into any organization. I'm not an organization person.
Yeah, that's all right. Can I ask, do you have any hopes for the future of the Fresno community and specifically the Fresno Armenian community?
Well, all I'm saying that they've gotten into the community, and whatever they've gone into, whether they started a furniture business or did this or that, like Leon Peters, he started a company called Valley Foundry. It was up and coming. It was built all the wineries in the state of California, damn near, from his company, and what they've done well in all the things that they've gone into. And they worked hard, and they're hardworking people. They've done well in farming, even with all the bad prices and everything else. They've done pretty good in farming, and so we've assimilated into the citizenry of this area. And I'm proud of them. I'm proud of being an Armenian, and I was extremely proud of being the youngest of 5 brothers. I was always proud of my brothers.